Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 4, Section 3, Buddhism. So follow along. Again, we're going to take a look at this map. Last time we were together, we talked a little bit about Hinduism, but today we're going to talk about the religions of the Far East, primarily talking about Buddhism. If you take a look at the map, the area where I'm moving my cursor right now, this would be basically modern day China. And if you take a look at the key of the map below, you're going to find that a good portion of the people who live here are probably practicing Buddhism or other forms of Eastern religion like Taoism or Confucianism. As we go along, we're going to mention a few things about Taoism and Confucianism, but we're going to focus today primarily on Buddhism. So let's talk a little bit about where this all begins. In number one, Siddhartha Gautama, aka Buddha, lived a sheltered life. He happened to be a young man of nobility. He was a prince, but at the same time, he was able to be enlightened. So he was deeply affected when he realized that there was suffering in life. And he resolved to find a way to overcome suffering, which led to the beginning of Buddhism. Number two, Siddhartha began his search for enlightenment by living in a forest and begging for food and studying with gurus. And if you take a look here, the legend says that Siddhartha Gautama was meditating under a tree, and he meditated for so long he literally was starving to death, but he did not necessarily waver in his devotion to his meditation. I think if you look at like modern art, there's a tendency for the Buddha to be pictated or at least depicted as kind of a roly-poly sort of fella. But truth is, Siddhartha Gautama was not quite like this. And just so we also kind of have an idea, maybe geographically, where we're talking about where all this kind of takes place, Buddhism, for the most part, really originated out of India, but eventually spread into other parts of Asia. So don't assume that this is just a Chinese kind of deal. There are Buddhists that live in other parts of the world, and yes, there are Buddhists that live in India. Number three, while meditating, Gautama discovered the ideas of the Four Noble Truths. And these are some of the core teachings of Buddhism. In the Four Noble Truths, you have number one, suffering is a part of human life, and no one can escape from it while they're alive. Suffering number two comes from people's desires for pleasure and material goods. And so if you want to stop suffering, well, you got to start curbing your desire for these things. And number three, overcoming these desires during life brings suffering to an end. And finally, number four, the desire to be overcome by the following the Eightfold Path. For the most part, you can overcome all those desires if you follow that path. And so the question leads to, what is the Eightfold Path? And in number five, the Eightfold Path are the following. You must have the right view. Number two, the right attitude, striving for moderation. And number three, the right speech, avoiding lies, boastfulness, hurtful words. For number four, the right action, treating others fairly. And number five, the right livelihood, avoiding jobs that could bring harm to others. And number six, the right effort, meaning that you're trying to improve yourself. And number seven, the right mindfulness, remaining aware of the world around you. And finally, in number eight of the Eightfold Path, right concentration, ignoring temptations and discomfort while meditating. So for number six, the state of perfect peace. This is the soul would be free from suffering forever. This is called nirvana. And this is what Buddhists try to strive for. So, in number seven, to express the Eightfold Path and to advise people to live in moderation. They must avoid extremes, extreme comfort, extreme discomfort in that search of nirvana. And this is called the middle way. And according to Buddha, those who don't attain nirvana are reborn to live through the cycle of suffering again and again until they have found it. So there are three main forms of Buddhism. You have Theravada, which is the old Buddhist tradition that teaches that the individual path to enlightenment. You have the Mahayana, which teaches people that they can help each other find enlightenment. And then finally, you have Tibetan, uh, which teaches that one can use special techniques to attain or achieve nirvana in a single lifetime. So, at number 10, Theravada. These people, for the most part, believe that the best way to achieve nirvana is to become a monk or a nun and to spend all of one's day in meditation. And number 11, the Mahayana Buddhists worship Bodhisattvas because these individuals have found enlightenment. And in a way, they can act as teachers so that others can obtain enlightenment. And number 12, Ashoka affected the spread of Buddhism. And you see Ashoka down in the bottom right-hand corner because he became a Buddhist. And under his rule, because he was a ruler in India, Buddhism was able to spread through his empire, and eventually it would make its way into parts of Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia. And he would eventually send missionaries to convert others to Buddhism. And at number 13, Buddhism spread through Central Asia and Southeast Asia, as well as Korea and Japan, through traders from Central and Southeast Asia. They were able to bring Buddhism to China. And so if we take a look at where you might find basically the spread of Buddhism, if you take a look at the different colors here of your key here, Theravadism, which is a form of Buddhism, is predominant in Southeast Asia. The Mahayana, which is a little bit more common in Far Eastern Asia, so places like Vietnam, China, Japan, parts of Korea, you would find that. And then finally, Tibetan Buddhism, found in places like Mongolia and the Tibetan region of China, as well as Nepal. Thank you very much.